Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to this afternoon's media conference on behalf of the Prime Minister. As you know, the Prime Minister has just returned from an official visit to China for a week, followed immediately thereafter by a very intensive working visit to Australia. And the Prime Minister is about to give us details of the travel, and he will entertain some questions thereafter.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, members of the media, members of the cabinet. I'm very happy to see so many of you attending this press conference, and I take it to mean that the country has been in good hands and continues to be in good hands. And see so many members of the media who have come to hear what I have to say, having not been here for 2 weeks. But ladies and gentlemen, I simply want to report that we have had a very successful period of overseas business being executed after what I would call extensive preparations. I want to begin by thanking the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister and the ambassadors of Australia, High Commissioner of Australia, and Ambassador to China, who for the last few months, I would say for about a year or thereabouts, have worked very assiduously in preparing for the contacts that we've made during this 2-week period in conducting and advancing the business of Trinidad and Tobago alongside our long-standing relationships with China and Australia. It was a very grueling trip, and I don't know that I will ever want to undertake a trip like this again, because it involved literally constant motion and living out of a suitcase and traveling from morning to evening at work and then day to day until we got back here. We had one rest day after 9,000 miles from Australia to Los Angeles. And we took a rest day there and then did the other leg from Los Angeles to Trinidad and Tobago. However, I could report that it has been a very successful trip because the planning had been very extensive, and the contacts that we've made and the issues that we addressed were quite substantial, and we were able to address them at the points where decision-making could be had. And that was the whole basis for such extensive planning. And I want to thank the team, Minister Young and Minister Moses, and our Chinese ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago, who have worked for over a year in trying to put together this kind of contact. As you may recall, there was an invitation to a meeting in China last year, an invitation by the Chinese, which they eventually very quickly had called off because of local issues in China. But we had indicated then that that was not really a big problem for us because our planning was to be executed at some time later, and I think it had been done on this occasion with a lot of credit to go to the organizers, the Chinese ambassador and our 2 ministers who have worked on this. The trip took us to Beijing, where we arrived there on Monday of last week, 2 Mondays ago. And on that very same day, we were able to meet with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, correctly pronounced, and all the arrangements were made for us to have had this very high level direct contact with the leadership of China. As you may know, Trinidad and Tobago has had diplomatic relations with China way back in 1962. And even though we operate different political systems, we have remained very close in our relationships, both at the level of government and the level of party. And we were very well received and very well treated in China. And we were exposed to the decision makers with respect to the issues that we were working on with respect to Trinidad and Tobago's relationship with China. The main outcome of this and other meetings in China was to shift our relationship, our business relationship, from one of providing contracts to Chinese contractors, which they have done over the years, to one where we move towards Chinese investment in Trinidad and Tobago. As you may recall, our country's development has largely been driven by foreign investment. If you look at most of the big businesses, particularly in the oil and gas sector, you would see that the investments that drove our economy, from which we have benefited substantially over the years, has been foreign investment. And in fact, there are some people who measure our progress and our success by the amount of foreign investment that we attract and utilize in Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, when this inflow of foreign investment appears to dip, there are people who predict our demise as a nation because we are so heavily dependent on foreign investment. Initially, it was out of Britain when we were a British colony, and correctly so. Eventually, soon after our independence, we had to look elsewhere. And also we had American investment, we had Canadian investment, and others. But at this point in time, where we have grown to the point where we can no longer rely on the level of foreign investment confined only to the energy sector, I might say, coming from the United States and lesser, if at all, from the United Kingdom. So it fell to us, if we are to diversify our economy, to look elsewhere in the world for that support to bring about the kind of growth and expansion that will allow us to sustain the life that we have come to know in Trinidad and Tobago. We still rely very heavily on investments from North America and elsewhere around the traditional sources. But at a time when China is now the world's second largest economy, and with a history of being in Trinidad and Tobago since 1806, and with Trinidad and Tobago's political capital invested in our relationship with mainland China, it was the position of this government that as we look for sustainable development, investment from abroad, to grow the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, that we pay attention to the investments that we have made. And in so doing, we sought to shift our focus in our relationship with China from being a provider of contracts to Chinese contractors to a situation where we can talk about Chinese investment, foreign direct investment, in the potential in Trinidad and Tobago to grow our economy, not just within Trinidad and Tobago, but to make Trinidad and Tobago a more effective regional power and to be a launching pad for international investment into Central and South America. It was against that background that when President Xi Jinping spoke about the Belt and Road Initiative in China's outreach to the world, we saw the potential for Trinidad and Tobago to benefit from and to play a bigger role in this initiative. So last year, Minister Young was invited, and Trinidad and Tobago took part in the launch of this Belt and Road Initiative, where China presented its roadmap from Beijing into the world, largely the world away from the Caribbean, because in the scheme of things, we are small and we are far away. But we had a lot to offer, and we participated in that initiative's launch. And we set about to work with the Chinese government and Chinese ambassador here and to see where Trinidad and Tobago could feature. because it all has to do with the role of foreign investment in our economy. And China has very, not gradually, but spectacularly become the world's second largest economy, and is willing to look outwards towards the economies of the world. And Trinidad and Tobago decided to claim its place in this new initiative and not just leave it for those who are in Asia and in Europe, but we in Trinidad and Tobago ought to claim our space on this. And we worked with the Chinese ambassador and Chinese government on this. And while the meeting that was cancelled last year was a meeting, a small event with respect to the re-election of President Xi Jinping and how China was going to move forward in probably a 1 or 2 day meeting, this trip to China, which was a substitute, was a very extensive one. And we worked from the time we arrived on Monday, the 14th? On Monday the 14th, we were pretty much at work until we left China 1 week later, meeting the people who in China can influence the development of Trinidad and Tobago. On Monday, our first day of our visit, we met with Premier Kijiang, and we had very useful meeting with him with respect to the discussions of the role that Trinidad and Tobago could play and that China could play. And together, our presence in the Caribbean could create new economies for us here. We had a very successful meeting with him, and the outcome of that meeting was that Chinese investment in Trinidad and Tobago was discussed in the context of commercial viable entities in which China would participate as an equity partner and not just as a seeker of contracts to be paid for by Trinidad and Tobago for Chinese companies that come and do work for us and return to China. Because that will not grow our economy. What will grow our economy is that we have things to do, and those things we cannot fund directly ourselves at this point in time, or that it has been too long in the making. And this gestation period, the longer we wait, the more difficult it becomes. And we were able to present to the Chinese our position, our perspective, and to indicate to them that the same way we've had foreign investment from the United States, from the United Kingdom, our former colonial leader, in today's world, we cannot but seek to make the most of what we have done as an independent nation since 1962. And to accept China as the world's second largest economy and a willingness to have them invest in Trinidad and Tobago's growth and development. And we were pleased to receive from the Chinese a commitment to do such. And against that background, in preparing this visit, against that vision of Trinidad and Tobago receiving foreign direct investment, not just providing contracts for Chinese contractors, but partnering with Chinese investment in some areas of development, which we need now if we are to diversify and expand our economy. And as we put that to the Chinese, there was an acceptance and a willingness that this is something that we can do. So in the very near future, we expect to receive from China a number of Chinese companies, some of the largest companies in the world. We met with the leaders of these companies, the boards, chairmen and boards of these companies, who are willing to come to Trinidad and Tobago to exploit the possibility of working with Trinidad and Tobago in creating a launching pad from Trinidad and Tobago into the region, into South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and we here in Trinidad and Tobago be that place of growth where these businesses can locate, with a background of a history of the number of years that we have had China as a partner in our development. We discussed the whole business of tourism based on Caribbean Airlines looking for partnership with one of the Chinese airlines. There were 2 Chinese airlines that we worked towards. One is Air China, which is China's number 3, or the world's number 3, and the Hainan, which is voted the world's number 1 airline. which one is in state hand, one is in private hand. And both these possibilities are very exciting for us at this point in time. And at the moment, a Chinese airline reaches as far as Cuba. But the potential for coming to Trinidad and Tobago and to move into South America has excited a number of the executives, and there will be a number of visits to Trinidad and Tobago in the very near future. And Caribbean Airlines would be working very closely with them, not just to provide support, but to see what kinds of partnerships we can work out. And the potential for significant tourism growth in Trinidad and Tobago and the region exists because these companies are not just aircraft flying companies. Many of them, like Hainan Airlines, they have significant business in tourism, significant businesses that we have an interest in having some location in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, they are prepared to consider equity investment in some of the projects that we are about to embark upon, not the least of which is the Sandals project in Tobago, which at this point in time is driven 100% by the government, not because we want to do that, but that is because that is what has to be done now to get it going. We've invited local businesses to participate. So far, we think maybe only one of them has any interest in even pretending to get invest. And the scale of the investment is such that we may have to look beyond our borders, and we've seen great possibilities in having foreign investment in a project of that nature and having it drive an expansion in our tourism and our airline services. And of course, it has been raised with us there that we can go further out of Trinidad and Tobago to drive Trinidad and Tobago as one of the locations from which cruise ships could operate in and around the Caribbean. And of course, we met with the chairman who have these opportunities to work with us, and we're issuing, on my conclusion, we'll issue you with a document so you will see in greater detail who we met with and what were the major issues that we were digesting on that. So we met with the Premier on the first day, and on the second day of our visit we met with the President Xi Jinping himself, and we had very useful discussions, and the Premier and President understood our position, accepted our position under one condition, that these opportunities that we talk about should have proper commercial routings, proper commercial moorings. And therefore what we're talking about is them participating in commercial enterprises out of Trinidad and Tobago. This is significant in that prior to this kind of development, what we really were a small nation providing contracts for Chinese contractors. We told them that that era is pretty much over. What we're talking about now is partnership in looking for growth, because our objective is an expansion of our economy and a diversification of our economy. And to do that, there needs to be significant investment. We have some kind of equity. They have some of the, China has a large number of the world's leading banks at this point in time, the world's leading businesses, the world's leading airlines. So therefore the area of tourism is an area in which we can have some partnership, and that is something that we'll be pursuing. There was another area that we were very keen to pursue, and we have advanced this quite significantly already by the prior work we've done before we got to China, and that has to do with attracting to Trinidad and Tobago a business which can make us a hub for ship repairs. When you look at the world's map and look at what they have done around the world, there is a great gap between Central and South America and the Caribbean, in that zone where Trinidad and Tobago could have a facility to provide maritime services of a world-class nature to the international community, driven by the requisite investment. And of course, that will allow us to feature prominently in a business in which we have some background, some history, some smaller investment. But we are here talking about providing support for Panamax vessels out of a dry dock in the Labre area. That project is considerably advanced. There are some finalities to be done there. And once we get a project like that going, it will provide an opportunity for us to participate in the world's shipping economy and also to provide good jobs for a lot of people who already have those skills in Trinidad and Tobago, but who are now not able to participate in this economy that exists. That project is considerably advanced. We met the leaders of the Chinese business that are involved in that. We met at the level of chairman and executive of that company, and very soon we should be able to close that arrangement because we have a lot of work done already for that project to get going, just the dots to be put in place and the T's to be crossed. And this now comes with the blessing of the leadership of the Chinese nation. We also had, we met with a number of Chinese businesses, world-scale businesses these are, who are interested in coming to take part in the Trinidad and Tobago's, that project that we talked about initially. You might have heard us talking about these, what you call it now, the industrial parks. Thank you very much. There was talk in Trinidad and Tobago earlier on about a number of industrial parks. But initially, the locations of these parks had significant drawbacks and had not gone very far. Because one first has to have the parks in an area, or the park in an area where shipping is easily facilitated. And of course, you have to know, you don't just build a park and expect that birds will fly in. We have to have an arrangement in the building of these parks as to who will come to the park. So we have been working for the last year on trying to ensure that we have at least 10 companies that will populate these parks so as to provide the requisite outflows of products after inflows of investment and location. We met a number of companies that are keen to come to Trinidad and Tobago to examine these possibilities, to see whether in fact they want to treat Trinidad and Tobago as this manufacturing location. And I can tell you that there's great excitement in this area. And we can produce, we have the skills, we have the location, and what we are trying to broker now is Trinidad and Tobago's location and our strengths, which we take for granted in a very many ways, from people who are now cleared by their leadership. Because as you know, if you see China as a source of foreign investment, as we are doing now, China being the world's second largest economy, it behoves us to look at that to see how we can participate. And as we do that, we are seeing the possibilities and we are getting the positive responses. So in the very near future, a number of these companies, I'm sure you've heard this before, but I give you the assurance that we are not just saying this because we worked on it for a year. We've brought it to a head, coming out of the highest level in China. And now we have these companies that are now seeing Trinidad and Tobago as a place to be for a variety of reasons, all positive. So in the next few months, or I should say next month and onwards, you will see us proceeding along these lines. So we looked at the area in tourism. We looked at the next area that we think that we have great prospect is the area of the dry docking. World-class dry docking. We visited one of the best dry docking facilities in the world, and those people are interested in coming to Trinidad and Tobago and to have in this region a facility that could allow us to be the location for servicing Panamax vessels, so that we get the benefit of the kinds of skills that we have been accustomed to here. We also discussed the whole question of the banking industry, because as you know, China has its currency, which its exchangeability is growing. It is now one of the currencies that is in the basket used by the international Bretton Woods agencies, and they would like to operate out of Trinidad and Tobago to bring to us an industry which we haven't had before, international banking of a certain type, and the use of the Chinese currency, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but in the region, following China's growth as a major player in Central and South America. Our heritage as English-speaking, English jurisprudence is now going to work for us in this kind of business. And our investment in education allows us to be able to participate very quickly in the kind of economic expansion that we are talking about. What I'm trying to say here is that as we look to see how we can diversify our economy, which we must, because confining ourselves to oil and gas, especially in a situation where these resources are, as you know, they're wasting resources, and some of them, as you see, our production in oil is now down below 70,000 barrels a day from where it was and so on. The imperative to diversify must push us to do other things, but we can't do it alone. This initiative is for us to leverage the strengths that we have. And one of those strengths is our location in the world and our conduct of business over time, that we have built up a reputation of being a serious nation conducting serious business. And now we can deal with serious people under serious leadership. And that's where we're at. Today, Trinidad and Tobago is dealing very seriously with the Chinese economy, with the Chinese leadership, with Chinese businesses to expand our economy and benefit from that. We prepared a document which will give you a bit more detail on the specifics as to who we met and what were the specific issues going forward, so you can be better informed. So our trip to China allowed us to meet face to face with the potential that our relationship with the second largest economy in the world can allow us to leverage at this point in time. And as you may know, Trinidad and Tobago as a small nation, we count for a lot in the Chinese environment because of how we conducted ourselves and our business since 1962. And we have not been forgotten. And we were very well received as if I may say so myself, as a most favored nation, arriving in China and being treated with the greatest respect by a nation that we stood with from its inception and its arrival at the United Nations. And today we are in search of growth and the potential for investment, and we are pleased that the doors of the second largest economy in the world have been so widely open to us on this visit. Then we went on to Australia, where again we've had a very good trip. As I think I would have mentioned before, I hope I did, that in my visit to London for the Shogun, I took the opportunity to meet with the Australian Prime Minister Turnbull. We met on the sides of that meeting and had some very good discussions about how Trinidad and Tobago and Australia could work together on a number of issues, not the least of which Australia's experience in dealing with what we have been dealing with respect to our response to the new scourge of terrorism. And we have great similarities with Australia and its experience. Unfortunately for them, they've had a bit more of that experience, and they have learned a bit more, and they're responding a bit more successfully. We have not had all those experiences, but we have had an exposure to the international terrorism, which is in the forefront of security today, and we are happy that we have a Commonwealth nation like Australia, which is ready and willing to share with us what arose out of their experiences, whether it is legislation, whether it is national security management of spaces, of cities, of persons, and the international communication that the current challenges demand of all nations. We are fortunate to have a Commonwealth sister country like Australia willing to work with Trinidad and Tobago on a common problem of counterterrorism. So we met in London, and Prime Minister Turnbull immediately put in place the contacts for Trinidad and Tobago to reach into the Australian government with respect to this matter and the other matter of our business at sea. We have two kinds of business at sea. One is the ferry service to Trinidad and Tobago, which, as you know, we came into office meeting groundwork on a crisis which materialized during the last year, and we have not done very well. We have suffered the consequences of the ferry service virtually collapsing at the end of the life of these two vessels that were driven virtually to extinction at a time when we came into government. We had to take the blows and the blame for that, but the rectification is within our reach. And what we have done, recognizing that the vessels that we have been using are Australian vessels, and they are the type of vessels that we would need to replace the service between Trinidad and Tobago, we set about immediately, over and above all the stopgap measures, we set about to put things in train to ensure that in the not too distant future, the link between Trinidad and Tobago, especially at Tobago, which is about to expand significantly its contribution through tourism, and to have Trinidad as part of Tobago's effort in tourism. I mean, as tourism in Tobago grow in the way that we are planning it, a day trip to Trinidad would be an aside for the thousands of visitors in Tobago. And for that to happen, we have to have a sound and secure bridge between Trinidad and Tobago. We need to make that investment now. We've done the groundwork. We've made the contacts. We are ready to make the decisions. It's going to cost us, but it's going to benefit us. And as fate would have it, the two companies that provide the kinds of vessels, the ones that we bought used, those of you who paid attention to Tobago, you'll remember the Cat was the first trial vessel. I'm sure most of you would have forgotten what happened in sea service between Trinidad and Tobago before the Cat came. Remember the Cat? I see my colleague looking at me in a complete befuddlement because she doesn't know what the Cat is. The Cat was the first fast ferry that came here on a trial run. And it was successful, even though the experts had told us, you know, the expert pontificators who always give you free advice had told us that that was a waste of time, it couldn't work, the sea was too rough and so on. So the government of the PNM took the decision, we'll have a trial. And we brought in the Cat. And the Cat did wonderfully well. And then we went and we purchased the Express and the Spirit as used vessels. We didn't buy them new, they were used vessels. And we worked them, and some people worked them, one would say, to the ground. And unfortunately, we came in the government when they were due for significant dry docking. You would have, I need not tell you what happened in the last few months, but thankfully, the Spirit, after 9 months of dry docking, in fact, the recommendation was that we should have got rid of it because it had been so utilized to the point where one of the expert opinions we had was that we shouldn't try to repair it. But those vessels were so hard to get worldwide that we had to take the decision to make the effort to repair it, and we've done so. It took a lot longer than we anticipated for a variety of reasons, but the Spirit is now back on service between Trinidad and Tobago with a 5-year certification, and we trust that we can maintain it, to have it operate at least for the initial period of that 5-year certification. The Express has now come out of service and is awaiting dry dock, and that we will deal with in the coming weeks and months. But in the meantime, given what we are planning for Tobago with respect to the expansion of Tobago's contribution to the national economy, that growth in tourism as part of our diversification effort, we need to make the investment, make the decision now, so that the travel between Trinidad and Tobago ought not to be an issue when we reach the stage where Tobago is playing a much bigger role in the economy by having grown its tourism offering in a significant way. So the two companies worldwide that are to be considered to provide us with the kinds of vessels that we need for the Tobago Trinidad leg, those two companies, incidentally, are Australian companies. There's one company on mainland Australia in Perth. That company is called Austal. We went to visit that company. Austal provides passenger ferries like, in fact, the four water taxis that we have here. Those are small Austal vessels. And unfortunately, we had 6 Coast Guard vessels, which we have managed not to make them seaworthy, and they're parked up somewhere in Chagaramas. And Austal vessels are premier vessels everywhere in the world except in Trinidad and Tobago. The 6 Austal vessels in Temblador, or wherever they are run to the ground and put aside, lack of maintenance. And I was surprised when I got to Australia to discover that we only had one of the 4 water taxis that was serviceable. And we are the only people in the world where that is happening, because that's how we conduct our affairs. But I give you the assurance, if I have anything to do with it, if my government has anything to do with it, that will be a thing of the past. We have now, as a country, to make the investment. We spent time looking. We have come to the conclusion that what we need to do is to get 1 initially and 2 eventually proper vessels from either Austal or INCAT. And the arrangements for doing so, we have discussed with the Australian government. Unfortunately, at this point in time, there's a government in Australia that sees this as something that Australia could do for and with Trinidad and Tobago. We are currently on their books for the water taxis, or is it the Austal vessels that we have here. We are still on their books, and the record is that we have done very well in that small package, but we are now aiming to go on a much bigger scale to get the vessels that we need and to get them new. And on that basis, the government, I will make proposals to the cabinet to have these 2 companies that provide the vessels that we need. These are aluminum vessels, which allow them to travel at higher speeds with less fuel burning output. The Austal vessels or the INCAT vessels, these are the catamarans that are the world beaters. When we got to both of these shipyards, Austal in Perth and INCAT in Hobart, we met them constructing these vessels for the Europeans and the Japanese who have islands like us and who have an island economy, and these are the vessels of choice. Trinidad and Tobago, if we are going to be a player in the kind of expansion that we're talking about and the kind of tourism growth that we expect in Tobago and the kind of service between Trinidad and Tobago, we are to place an order in the very near future for the first of those vessels when the competition tells us which is the best offering, because they're basically the same, but it's who will give us the best deal. And of course, we may even use both of them depending, because Austal also is a provider of aluminum vessels for naval purposes. It provides vessels, 58-meter fast craft for border patrol for Australia. Australia is an island continent with a bigger problem than we have here with our neighbors, with Australia and its Asian neighbors. And the vessels that do the bulk of the work for Australia in patrolling its borders and treating with incursions are what they call Cape-class naval vessels built by Austal. It is my intention to put to the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago that we acquire at least one of those vessels. And the Australian government only recently, I first discovered this when I spoke to Prime Minister Turnbull in London a few weeks ago, and we were able to furthered those discussions in Australia this week with my team, that Australia has put in place a $2 billion a $2 billion Australian dollar facility to assist countries like us to procure these naval assets from Australia, and I think Trinidad and Tobago would consider how we can procure one such 58-meter Cape-class vessel. Because as you may know, all the procurement we've done since the cancellation of the OPVs by the last Cavalier government leaves our Coast Guard with no significant ability to patrol our southeast and east and northern borders. Our east coast is wide open to anybody who wants to come in there. With the best will in the world in what we have, the east coast is not properly patrolled. The south coast is not. And of course, for those of you who know the geography of the island of Trinidad and Tobago, you will know that our economic well-being is now anchored 60, 80, or 100 miles east of us in the area that we have the least ability to patrol. Now that is a kind of madness that this government is not prepared to allow to continue indefinitely, and we will take steps to ensure that we can protect our borders and that we can protect our assets off the East Coast. And to do so, if we have to suck salt, if we have to work twice as hard as we must, the bottom line is that we have to protect the assets, the God-given assets that we have, and to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago is not an open territory where anybody could walk in and do as they please and leave us with a kind of hell that we cannot countenance as the nation with such great promise. So we have gone to Austral, we visited the yard, we've seen what they've done, we know them. They are the company that provided us with the vessels that we ran into ground at the Coast Guard, lack of maintenance, the water taxi service. I understand there's only one water taxi working right now, lack of maintenance. But that is going to change because we are going to put different arrangements in place. But more than that, we are going to ensure that we get a competitive position with the assistance of the Australian export entity, government-owned entity, in what you may call government-to-government arrangement, because it is government-facilitated to facilitate the funding of the procurement of these craft. We will ensure that in the very near future, as a responsible nation, wanting to protect our assets and our people, that whatever else we have to buy 2 ferries, and we have to buy at least 1 Cape-class vessel or something of that nature to allow us to patrol our eastern and southeastern borders. If we can't do that, then the whole question of our nationhood comes into question. Whatever else we do, we have to do that. We will have to borrow to do it, but it's not the borrowing we have to worry about, it's the repayment schedule. We spent a long time, this government, we are 2.5 years in office, we spent a long time on the energy sector, shoring up our position there to allow us to be able to get the best from that sector, to allow us to do the kinds of things I'm talking about now, so that our future can be one where we think we are in a better position now as we go forward with our energy sector, and therefore we could take the giant steps to protect not just our borders, but the gains that we have made as a nation. So we had very good discussions with the Australian Prime Minister and his team, including Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, and I want to thank the Australian High Commissioner here, who worked with us tirelessly prior to this visit to ensure that the visit was one of serious work. And we are at a stage now where, having been to the yards and see what is going on there, having spoken to the people, the key to the whole thing is that even if we write a check today, we can't get a vessel built. We got to try and find a slot in the rollout of vessels. But if we move very quickly, we might be able, once we have agreement on matters, things like price and timing and so on, which the competition between the 2 companies will give us. If we move very quickly in our decision making here, we should be able to get at least 1 slot in one of these yards, and to see how quickly we could get not only the ferry, but a naval vessel to strengthen our border patrol arrangements. And interestingly enough, in our discussions with the yards, turns out that the reason why we can't get or couldn't get replacement vessels when our vessels were coming to the end of their certification in recent months is because the world market and demand for these vessels is so high that there are none knocking about. So what we have discovered and the arrangements and the offers made to us is that as soon as we put an offer in for a new vessel, we can virtually sell the 2 used vessels that we have here, because there's a good market for these vessels, and we can actually put them on the market and have them. One is 21 years old, the other one is a little newer. So even though we're having to change them, but there's a great trade-in. So some of their value and the money we just spent repairing the Spirit is not wasted, is not lost, because when we come to commit to a new vessel, that vessel that we have now would have a significant resale value going forward into the market. And the yards that we, my memory isn't as good as it used to be. Was it only INCAT that offered, or was it INCAT and Hostel who offered to take, INCAT offered to, yeah, the vessels we have here, 2 INCAT vessels. We bought them used. And of course, if we place an order with them later on, if we are satisfied with the proposals after the competition, they are prepared to, but the vessels are valuable. That's the point I'm trying to make. And so when we come to place a new order, we will have something to trade. So, and of course, we met with the Australian people who have been dealing with the kinds of criminal conduct that seems to be par for the course in Trinidad and Tobago. We met with the New South Wales Police Department. Minister Young was, the forefront of that. And the document we give you, you'll see who we met and what we did and how important it is to have done so. So we have made great headway with respect to not having to reinvent some wheels in legislation, because the Australians, a Commonwealth country, a leading Commonwealth country, they have legislated to treat with the same issues, the identical issues that we have to treat with here, with respect to terrorism and so on, protecting rights, but protecting the country from the world's scourge. Though the Australians are ahead of that, they've had to deal with the same kinds of things. They had the same kinds of jurisprudence. So whatever got past the Australian judiciary there, we expect that Trinidad and Tobago wouldn't have to reinvent that. We are currently in the process of going to the Parliament with our anti-terrorism laws. We wouldn't have to spend too much time trying to relocate the position that we need to be in, but there's a lot we can learn from what has already been done at the Australian Parliament, which we visited, and we met the leaders in the business of supporting the legislative program in Australia, and we are going to benefit from that, and there's going to be some sharing of preparations between Trinidad and Tobago and Australia with respect to our legislative program, putting into law what has already been tried and tested in a Commonwealth country like Australia, where our jurisprudence is, one can say, is heavily influenced by as a Commonwealth country of note. So that work has already begun, and we have asked for some police training to be made available to us. That has not been confirmed as yet, but we intend to continue to make that request of Australia, because they have had an experience that we could benefit from, and what we're aiming to do is to ask them to provide our police service here, bring the trainer here to train people rather than try to send people there, because you get more out of the program. We intend to pursue that, and there's some intention that that may be available to us. We also managed to visit BHP, which is one of the companies operating in Trinidad and Tobago, at this time engage in serious exploration off in our deep water. And BHP partners with some of the other companies, including Shell and I think BP as well. No? So BP is an operator. Their business is really, their core business is mining. They came out of hard ore mining, and they got into oil and gas, and they have become, if not the world number one, but one of the world leading companies in offshore drilling, deep sea drilling. And in Trinidad and Tobago, they are the operators of some of the acreage that have been won by the other companies that have been awarded acreage here. So far, they've done quite well, and there's one well in the exploration program, the Leclerc well, which has been very successful. What we discussed and what the cabinet is considering now, even before I went to Australia, is that because of the need for us to grow our production very quickly, our production of gas, because as you may recall, we had a shortage of gas which was resulting in closures in Point Lisa's plants and so on and so on. In the last year, I think it was last year, May or March, in the visit I made to Houston, up to that point, there was a bit of a stagnation with us as a location for investment in the gas industry because we had been coming to the end of the contracts for the companies that were engaged in gas production and gas utilization in Trinidad and Tobago. And in the absence of a new agreement on a gas price going forward, our industry was stalling. And we had reached the point where we were producing approximately 3.2 BCF of gas, meaning that we had a shortage of about 800 BCF, meaning that the some companies were closing down, and some companies were cutting back by as much as 20 or 25% of their utilization of gas. All of that meant significant losses to the exchequer, and we were being seen as a location that was coming to the end of our usefulness as an investment area. That's what we were facing. We rectified that last year after a number of months of NGC and these companies meeting. They came very close, but they could not conclude. Eventually, we got them, the companies, NGC and the foreign companies, to agree to a gas price that both sides were happy with. And as soon as that was done, it has resulted in a multi-billion US dollar investment program in mainly our offshore area, which is now seeing us having a brighter future with respect to the production of gas going forward. And the Leclerc well that BHP has drilled is a good beacon in this area. And what we have discussed, or we are discussing, is close to conclusion, is that because of the country's need to produce the gas as quickly as we could, we can't follow the same template we used to follow before, which is you have a development, exploration program, and you go and you test here, test there, and you see what is good and what is not good. But that's all exploration. We want to move from exploration to production as quickly as possible because we are not producing as much gas as we can consume, given the plants that we have on the ground. We have a new plant coming in the Mitsubishi plant that is coming in, which will have a consumption of gas which we do not now have. So we have to move quickly to ensure that when that plant is ready by the end of next year, towards the end of next year, that there's gas for that plant. Otherwise, the whole investment into that plant would have been a non-starter. So what we're doing now, and what we discussed with BHP, is to change the arrangement, the production sharing contract arrangements that we have now, and not focus solely on exploration in the area where we had already seen some success, but to remodel our contracts so that BHP can now move very quickly into development of the Leclerc wells. So there are other wells to be drilled, not exploration wells, but development wells, so that the gas that has been found at Leclerc can be brought to market as quickly as possible. The company has agreed to do that, and we are going to have to work out the technical details, and the details, these are very serious technical and legal matters. We are very advanced in those discussions, and very soon, as a matter of fact, we have been advised that in anticipation of a conclusion of these discussions with the government, there are rigs on the way to do the number of wells to delineate the Leclerc field and to move us quickly from exploration to production to ensure that we have the gas that we need to keep Point Lisas going at this level at which we expect. And of course, we'll move into, as a parallel program, into the exploration behind that. So we have a lot of work coming there. And of course, you know, with BP, because of the agreements we've had recently and the gas price that we've concluded, BP is moving full speed ahead in the Southern Basin. So we expect that in the not too distant future, we will be in a happier state with respect to our gas production. And of course, we have Shell aiming to do, you know, we had the starfish failure of many years ago. The new technologies and the efforts that we have made through Shell. Shell is now a major player in Trinidad and Tobago, not only in the LNG plant, but also in the upstream. And they've gone back in with new technologies, which is very exciting for people like me, geologists. But the starfish field is now appearing to be successfully drilled, and we expect to get some production from there. And in the months and weeks and months ahead, I'm sure the companies will make their own announcements as to how they're doing on these matters. But as a country, because of the decisions we made recently on the gas price and on the kinds of things I just talked about, we are in a better position to be producing at the level of consumption that we desire to give us the kinds of revenue. And of course, you know that we did something that caused some people to have had a few sleepless nights recently. We have applied a royalty to some gas which was not being taxed by royalty. And of course, there were those who felt that boldness on the part of the government of Trinidad and Tobago would see foreign investment leave our country because we'd be annoying these multinationals and so on. That is not how it goes in the world. In these areas, reason prevails. And we have been acting with reason with these companies. We have put to them our demand for the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago to be paramount, and as a government we can do no less, and we have done so. And the end result of that, in the first instance, is a $260 million improvement in our earnings in the next 24 months or thereabouts, agreed to by one of these companies, monies which we otherwise would not have had, because they've agreed that Trinidad and Tobago should get a little more of the pie. There are other areas that we have to discuss where we are talking about not getting a fair deal, and we are not ashamed or afraid to speak directly to where these problems lie, but we do so respectfully. And we, in the next week or two, next 2 weeks, there are some major discussions to take place in Trinidad and Tobago. We have shored up our own capacity to negotiate with these companies, because what we have observed, unfortunately, is that over time we had become very lax in treating with people who were better positioned and better prepared than Trinidad and Tobago. And we've made agreements which have not given us the best outcome. But all we need to know is to learn from that. The real crime would be to repeat it. So what we have done, having identified the problems that we are experiencing now as a result of our own lack of preparation, this government has found and is using very experienced people in the oil and gas assessment sector. We have one of those on board, Portal and Partners, and then we've gone out and we've hired the best in class on the legal side, and they will sit down with us on our side of the table in negotiating with these companies. I can tell you the meetings we've had in recent times with Shell and with BP, we saw an acknowledgement from these companies that they should and would sit with us and respectfully revisit our role and our presence in the LNG business. And one of the things that came up in the Chinese visit, there's one Chinese company, a new investment, first time, Chinese company investing in energy in Trinidad and Tobago, and I think they own 10% of LNG, of one of the trains, and that gives them an insight into the business here, and that's how these businesses go. The door is wide open. These are international businesses, and Trinidad and Tobago, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, has to act as required by these international circumstances. I'm afraid to say that we have not been doing that. We have been advising ourselves, and in some instances, we didn't do very well. We are now well prepared. We have the best in class on the legal side, the best in class in the understanding of the business side. And in the next few weeks, we will be having some discussions with Shell, with BP, and all those who are involved in the LNG business. Because it is the contention of Trinidad and Tobago that while we own the resources, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we are not benefiting sufficiently. It is my position to these companies that their board, their chairmen, some of whom I know very well, I've met them in recent years and I got to know them very well. And they will tell you all along that on every occasion I tell them, you have a duty to look after the interests of your shareholders. I have a duty to look after my shareholders. And my shareholders are the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the owners of the resource. And they understand that very well now. So we'll sit down around a table and we'll revisit and we will see. And I'm confident that at the end of these discussions, all of us will come away winners. Because once it is fair and it is reasonable, all participants would be winners, and Trinidad and Tobago will remain a place for foreign direct investment, whether it is from the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Italy, or China. We have to remain a place where foreign direct investment is welcome. And if we are going to expand our economy and bring about the diversification, that cliched word that we talk about, to expand our economy, to sustain our quality of life. I'm not even talking here about improving our quality, I'm talking about sustaining it, because very easily, if we don't preserve the gains we've made, we could slide away from what we've been accustomed to. So our first objective is to preserve those gains, and our second milepost is to expand on that growth. And so in doing that, we have chosen to conduct our affairs in the manner that I've just described. What we have just done on this Chinese trip is to look for foreign investment from a non-traditional area. We grew up here in this country as British colonials. Our investment use started out in my early days as British investment, because we were a British colony. And alongside that, we had some Commonwealth, where it is available, whether it was Canadian or otherwise. And then we've always had American investment. We've always maintained that kind of relationship, and there's always been American investment in Trinidad and Tobago. As a matter of fact, many people measure our progress as a people as to how much foreign direct investment we attract every year. Some people measure our progress on that basis because we are so dependent on that to sustain or to advance our own quality of life. That being so, and the world being the way it is now, it behoved us to look for that inflow from the world's second largest economy, which happens to be a friend of ours, the People's Republic of China. From day one, it has been the position of Trinidad and Tobago that we support the One China policy. Some of our Caribbean neighbors support the Taiwanese as China. We have always supported the One China policy as our foreign policy and view Taiwan as a renegade Chinese province. Today, China is the world's second largest economy and welcomed Trinidad and Tobago in a manner that was nothing short of dazzling. Recognizing that we, a Caribbean leader, China's presence in the region we expect it will be through Trinidad and Tobago. We are expecting that we made our offers to our local business houses to participate with us in the Tobago tourism expansion, the Sandals project. We made the offer, and two of our local houses indicated that they would be willing to participate. Because the way it is, if we are going to expand on the scale that we want to expand, the government has to set about to undertake that the project is going to go ahead, even if it means 100% government supported. Because that's how it has been all along. Many things that we've done in this country, it required the government to invest in it 100%. And later on, it becomes attractive to others who may want to participate or just benefit. In this Sandals project in Tobago, the government undertakes that it's going to be done, even if we have to underwrite it ourselves. But we've made the first offer to our local business houses because we are confident it's going to be a good investment. Two of our local business houses indicated that they would consider participating, equity participation. The third one said they're not interested. In recent times, I got the impression that one of the two may no longer be interested. But the bottom line is that the offer will be made. But now we've gone further. We've made the offer to the Chinese. Because one of the companies that Cal is talking to, Caribbean Airlines is talking to, for code sharing and other kinds of arrangement that we can benefit from in our expansion in our economy, is Hainan Airlines. And that airline is rated the #1 for quality of service worldwide. In the world. It's the best Chinese airline. And it's in private hands on the island of Hainan. And we're also talking to Air China, which is state-owned. That's the Hainan airline is a 5-star. Air China, well, they say Air China is one of the biggest airlines in the world, but it carries 3 stars out of China on the awarding of stars. But these two companies are among the world's leading airline business houses. And both of them we are in communication with, and both of them are interested in looking at us because both of them want a Caribbean presence and a South American gateway, one of which Air China is already in Cuba. That's as far as they've been. We from Trinidad and Tobago, through our national airline, CAL, and part of this trip, we are aiming to partner with one of these airlines so that we can get the benefit of reaching into the world that they bring. And side by side, they are also in the business of moving tourists out of China. And we are encouraging an investment from such an entity in the Sandals project in Tobago, meaning that the government wouldn't have to carry the whole equity of constructing and building it, but we also would share. That's where the burden on the government to create that kind of business could be. And we've seen some interest, and in the not too distant future, we'll have the requisite visits by the persons. We've met the company's leaders. We met at the level of chairmen and boards, executives of those companies, and coming out of the backing of the meetings of the Premier and the President of China, they're all excited to come to Trinidad and Tobago, and they were all excited to know that we had been to see the President and the Premier. The bottom line is that this is a period, this particular moment in time, this is a period that Trinidad and Tobago have to grab these opportunities with both hands and move from the cliche conversation of diversification to actually getting things done to expand and sustain our well-being. This is what the trip was all about. And we are leveraging our relationship with countries that can work with us to take us from where we are to where we want to be. China and Australia. The trip has been very grueling. I will tell you that I don't think I will ever plan another trip like that again. But we survived. Every single day from morning till night, we were at work. We survived. And we have come back with a lot of work. And in the document we'll give you, you'll see the actual details of who we met with and where they fall into what I've just said. And in the coming weeks, there'll be some interesting things happening in the country. The Ministry of Energy, let me take the opportunity now to thank former Minister Wendell Motley. I wasn't here, I saw in today's papers that he has confirmed what he indicated to us at the government, that he would withdraw from the energy subcommittee that he was chairing, the cabinet committee which dealt with the gas negotiations. I want once again to thank former Minister Motley for being a citizen who answered a call. He was not in the best of health, and I think we had a good relationship when we were in the cabinet of Mr. Manning. And I think out of deference that I suspect, he agreed to take responsibility for that period in the last year and a half, to bring his tremendous wealth of experience and his cool and calm demeanor to work with the government and the companies to bring us to a place where we could have got the gas agreement that we got, which is now spurring the exploration and development in Trinidad and Tobago. He stayed on. I persuaded him to stay to bring us to the point where we are now, which is the heavy lifting has been done, and he has been wonderful in his difficulty. He never shirked his responsibility. He pulled the teams together. We got to a point now where we can simply say to him, we wish him good health and we wish him all the best. And there's no other patriot like him at this time. And his presence and his input has been valuable in Trinidad and Tobago, invaluable input to where we are. We think we have managed to be in a position now where the energy sector issues are, under control. Let me just use that phrase, under control. And that's why we have moved now out into expecting prosperity from that sector, in that sector, averting disaster in that sector. We were very well positioned now to make this trip to Asia and Australia to look towards expansion of our economy. This is where the real diversification is going to come. In the not too distant future, you would see a presentation that was made to us in China from some of the work that we have been doing the last few months. And that is to create this dry dock business in Trinidad and Tobago that can handle any ship that is Panamax grade, which is the largest ocean-going vessels. There's no such facility in this region. There's something in Curacao, but they have the issues. We are aiming to get into that business, but we couldn't go it alone. One, we don't know the business enough, and two, we don't have the wherewithal to create the business. But we have the location where the business is attractive. And one of the days in China, one of the things we did, we received a presentation from the work that was being done here in Trinidad and Tobago by the Chinese companies that are looking to make that investment in Trinidad and Tobago to create a world-scale dry dock that could handle 2 vessels of the largest tonnage and provide for us the kinds of, once that investment is made to create that facility here, this is foreign exchange earning because it provides a service to the world and they pay for it in foreign currency. But also, as important in that particular business, it's a business that we as a people know something about. And a lot of the skills in South Trinidad, in and around the oil industry, are the kinds of skills that would be attracted into that new industry. So it will provide wonderful opportunities for people who might have begun to think that we are at the end of our tether in this kind of business. But if we manage to create that dry dock business in Trinidad and Tobago, that international dry docking business on that scale, partnering with the world-class Chinese companies, then this is the kind of quantum leap that we're talking about in diversification. The word diversification in Trinidad and Tobago is now a cliche. What we've tried to do on this trip is to move from there to a handful of specific things that we can and will be attempting to do, which will give us that quantum leap in economic expansion and sustenance of our quality of life that we've come to know. I want to thank Minister Young and Minister Moses, who worked tirelessly with the requisite ambassadors, in particular, the ambassador to or High Commissioner to Australia and the Chinese ambassador. And for the last almost a year, they've worked tirelessly on all of these projects. And we are beginning to see the fruits of that labor. And if we manage to achieve what we have set out to achieve, then the diversification of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago that we have been hankering after could begin to occur in the areas of tourism, in the area of maritime services, in the area of manufacturing, because one of the things that we met with a group of Chinese businessmen who are the ones identified to populate the industrial estate, which we have now taken to the coast. Because the previous government had taking industrial estates to their constituencies. Well, all the constituencies in Trinidad and Tobago is our own. We choose the best location. So we have taken this project to the coast, where it is far more attractive because we are aiming towards export. And that project is well in hand. Minister Gopi Skoon has been working with that, and the execution is about to take place, among others. And while we have some seemingly intractable problem with our own behavior, and this crime problem that everybody seems to think that is beyond us, we will stay with it. We're going to overcome it. But I'm excited about the prospect of Trinidad and Tobago. And having made this trip, and having leveraged Trinidad and Tobago's reputation and the investments we made in our persons and in our country as an internationally known location for seriousness and serious business, I am confident that the things that we've embarked upon to expand our economy, to diversify our economy, to attract the kind of investment that is needed to make a difference, that we are on a good course. In the weeks and months ahead, you will see the outcome of this visit, and I trust that my enthusiasm is not misplaced. Thank you very much. If there are questions, I'll take a few. Yes, I'll take the questions.
Did any
If there are no questions, I'll be very happy.
did any of the Chinese officials raise with you concerns about crime against Chinese nationals living and working in Trinidad and Tobago?
No, that is not an issue, but I must say it has not been raised by any company or any person on the visit. But that is not to say that it's not a serious issue. The crime issue in Trinidad and Tobago has to remain on the forefront for all of us, investors coming in and those of us who live here. We all have to address this issue and bring it to a head.
The industrial park,
Yes.
you talked about, I mean, we have the park at Tamana, yes, in Tech Park. We have the one at Labre, the Union Industrial Estate. Those are not filled. So what are you saying, that they are not?
They're aiming to, those parks, they all have their usefulness. They're different. The one that I'm talking about is a manufacturing zone to manufacture goods, bring in raw materials, manufacture and export. And we're aiming to make it an export free trade zone. The Tamana Park is a park that we're aiming for high-tech type of industries, a different kind of industry, and that too will attract its own kind of business. And the other one you mentioned, which is Labre. Labre is heavy industry, pretty much heavy industry.
But I thought the Chinese companies that were coming were biotech and that they were tech companies.
Well, as of now, we are open for business. We are not circumscribing any kind of business, as long as it's a business that we want in this country, and we are seeking to encourage the investment. So whether they come, as a matter of fact, one of the companies we met was Huawei, which is one of the world's leading tech companies. We are trying to attract tech companies, and the tech companies will have their location, the terminal type location. The manufacturing for consumer goods will have near the ports, the one I just mentioned, and elsewhere, and of course the heavier industry in the La Brea, Union area and so on. So there's some method to it.
With respect to the industrial park, who exactly on the local side of things will be project manager for construction? Would it be E-Tech or NEC?
The NEC holds some of the land and we provide it as a landlord, and E-Tech is the driver of the business, and E-Tech also has its park, and E-Tech would be it's mainly E-Tech as our project manager.
You mentioned Huawei as one of the companies that
we actually, I didn't mention that, but we did visit Huawei. Huawei is a company that is providing us with our IT platform here, which our agents, a number of agencies are using, particularly those in the national security area. And we visited them, and they're already here in Trinidad and Tobago. And the question is what more they can do with and for us.
I just wanted to identify maybe some of the other companies that have expressed interest in that park. Do you have their names?
Some of them you know already, but we met, what we did in China, we went to the top. For example, you would have heard about China Railway, China, Jiangsu, I don't want to mispronounce it, but they're in the document there, right? But what we did, we met with chairmen and executives of those companies, right? We met, for example, the ports that we went to see the ports. I've written down for you who we met, right? So I don't want to sound as if they're my next door neighbors. It takes a little while to digest the quantum. But some of them are companies that you're already familiar with. Like we met the parent company of China Harbour. That's one of the main companies we met, because that's the one that we're talking about, getting the equity investment for the dry docking I mentioned a while ago. The Hainan, the chairman of CAL was on the trip, as you know. He, while I opened those discussions for them, I didn't stay to carry on the whole proceeding. That they were left to their own. The chairman of CAL and his, that company is also a very big company in HNA. They're very big in tourism. 120 million Chinese traveled last year, and the rate at which they're growing as international tourists, the number is expected to be 200 million in the next 48 to 60 months. We just want a little piece of that. And these companies are very, some of them are very integrated, and the scale at which they operate will boggle your mind. And the document we'll give you the detail that you're just seeking there.
With respect to the vessels that you all are looking to procure from Australia,
Incat and Ostal, these are the companies that produce aluminium vessels.
First of all, with Incat and the arrangements you're looking at there, is the arrangement such that whenever we put the order in for the new vessels, and whenever the Spirit and the Express go back in the opposite direction, would we be faced with a situation where we have no vessels at all?
Come on. We're not going to do anything like that. What I try to, maybe the fault is mine. Let me try it. We have two vessels, the Incat vessels, the Spirit and the Express. When the trial was successful with the Cat, we decided to go and get two vessels like the Cat. But those vessels could not have been bought new because they're not available. So we got two used ones, the Spirit and the Express. We've run them virtually to the bottom of the ocean, largely unmaintained. We just got one back out of a 9-month maintenance period. That one is now reasonably healthy, keeping our fingers crossed that it can hold the line and not continue what happened for the last year where we didn't have a proper ferry on there. The Express is now withdrawn from service and is to go into dry dock. We are taking steps to make sure that the Express dry docking doesn't end up like the Spirit dry docking, where 6 months became 9 months. So what I did say was that these two vessels, we are discovering that even though they are problematic for us in our service, because of the demand for these vessels, a demand which caused us not to have been able to replace them when we wanted to. If we place an order in now for new vessels as we want to do, as we must do, if the rest of our diversification is to go ahead as we're talking about, we must place orders now for new vessels. But once we do that, the market is such that there will be the potential to sell the Spirit and the Express in an advanced way. Because there are people in the world market who will want them and will, in fact, what we are told, that there are people who may want to obtain them now and lease them back to us just so that they will get them when we get our new ferry. And of course, whatever monies we will get for selling them, because notwithstanding how we run them into the ground here, when we repair them, as we've done with the Spirit, they will have some resale value. That earning will become part of the payment of the new ones, right? So, but we need to move very quickly if we are going to get slots for building any of the new ones in any reasonable time, because the demand for these ferries are tremendous.
To get a proposal from MCAT and or Ostal, and in your discussions with them, is there a price range for these vessels?
Well, the proposals, we're expecting the first set of proposals to come in within 2 weeks, and the price is not an unknown quantum, because these businesses are well known. When they give us a price, we will then have to negotiate around what they're telling us, and it is going to be funded once our expectation works out the way we are working it, by the Australian Export Corporation, which is a government agency. So while it's not a government-to-government arrangement as such, it will have to meet certain standards. And therefore, the shenanigans that this country has become accustomed to will not form part of these discussions. And they're not, the vessels are not cheap. When we bought the Spirit used, what did we pay for it? 60 million US for a used, and it was how old? It was 3 years old in time, and the other one was older. 10 years old. And what did we pay for that one? 20 million for a 10-year-old vessel. The new vessels will cost in the order of 80 million US dollars. So you could look at what you can get for the ones we have and what you're going to have to. But this is state-of-the-art vessel. If we are talking about the Tobago tourism, having an extended leg into Trinidad for the kinds of day trips, because if you're bringing tourists to Tobago, you got to figure out what they do when they get there. And one of the things you want to offer them, which is special to Trinidad and Tobago, is if you come to Tobago as a tourist, you get Trinidad as an extra. Right? So we have that potential, but you have to have the infrastructure to do it. And that infrastructure is the sea transport. So the Cabinet in the very near future will make a decision. We'll evaluate the offerings from both companies, make a decision, try to get early slots, put an order in, and it will take probably 18 months for the first one to become available. During that period, we hope that we will survive on the refurbished Spirit and Express. And of course, by the time we would have built the Sandals project in Tobago, we should have had vessels on station, and the service should have been a completely different and improved service to what we experience now.
That $80 million price tag, is that for one vessel or two?
One vessel, sir.
One.
I just told you we bought a used one for 60 million.
Prime Minister, in two ferries, I presume you mean passenger ferries. Is
Passenger
it that
ferries, yes.
You would keep the cargo vessel situation as is, or do you intend on improving?
Good question. These passenger ferries that we are talking about will have a capacity, but we don't think that the capacity will be, if they are to have the speeds that they ought to have to give you the fast ferry passenger service, you can't overload them with cargo. The ones that we looked at, which is the 109, 111 meter ones, they will have a capacity to carry 32 large lorries, articulated lorries. So that will not, that question is not yet answered. But we will see some improvement because we also are going to have to go on the cargo side for a cargo vessel, right? But it's what kind of cargo vessel we're going to look at. But the fast ferries will have some cargo capacity as well. But that capacity, especially if the Tobago economy grows the way we expect it to grow, we may still have to have dedicated cargo service.
Naval vessels that you talked about, if whenever we get one or two or whatever, what does that mean for the future of the Daman vessels and the vessel we got from China?
To be an addition. We would need all the vessels that we have at the moment to be available for coastal patrol if we are to secure our borders. It doesn't mean that all will be at sea at once like a flotilla, but you have to have an ability to be at sea all the time. Right? What has been happening is that there are times when we are not at sea and our borders are open. So you have to have a fleet of vessels that can maintain, that have you maintain a presence at sea all the time. So some will be on dry dock, some will be in close, some will be out. So you have to have the ability that at all times our coastline will be under surveillance and protection. It's the absence of that that is causing us to be the recipient of the imports that we do not wish to have. The guns and the ammunition and the human trafficking and all that, because our borders are too porous. And those who told us that our borders are not to be defended at sea did us a great disservice. And the chickens are now home to roost. This government is going to make the investment. We have a Coast Guard that's going to protect us working at sea. And we have vessels that we bought that were allowed to run to wreck and ruin. As a matter of fact, next week, Austral is due here to do a report on those vessels to see what is to become of them. We are going to repair them, and we are going to make them available to the Coast Guard. And while I'm on this, let me tell you something else too. We discovered to our horror in Hobart, where Austral operates on the island of Tasmania, we discovered that there was correspondence between Austral, whose vessels are in this country, we know them, when we were desperately looking for a ferry to service Incat, sorry, not Austral, Incat in Hobart, Incat in Tasmania. When we were desperately looking for a replacement vessel to service Tobago, to allow the Spirit and the Express to go into dry dock, there were people on the government payroll in Trinidad and Tobago who refused to respond to Incat, who were in a position to make vessels available to us. But the government employees here were telling the board, can't find nothing. But they were finding ocean flower and Cabo Star for us. And we discovered, but we're going to pursue that matter further. Right? People who knew the hell we were going through as a people, Tobago economy being wrecked, making their own private arrangements. And we go quite to Tasmania to see correspondence to people on the government payroll in Trinidad and Tobago, people who didn't bother to reply because it didn't suit their agenda.
The port, correct?
They're all about. Yes?
What institutional arrangements is the government making with regard to the maintenance of vessels?
That might be the best question that you put to me today. As I speak to you now, we have not made any. But the proposals that will come to us for the purchase of those vessels must have with them a rider for maintenance for at least 7 years. And serious transfer of technology to our people here who will eventually build up a capacity. And there's something else which I won't mention at this point in time, but we have another ace up the hole.
Prime Minister, not only maintenance company, but what about technical training?
That too will that too will play an integral part in the decision that the government makes when you make a decision as to who does what for us in this area. Maintenance and training. After the experience we've had, we will be crazy to not put that in the forefront. We have 6 hostile vessels gathering moss in the Coast Guard that we're paying for on a monthly or quarterly basis. Minister of Finance paying for them. They're down there gathering moss. And we've examined this very closely. Everywhere else that they've sold vessels to, vessels are doing well. Trinidad and Tobago, not so. They're supplying vessels to the U.S. Navy. Trinidad and Tobago, not so.
Prime Minister, you mentioned the sandals arrangement several times. You said it's going to cost the country. Has the government done a cost-benefit analysis on the whole Tobago tourism expansion? And if it has, what's the result?
That is like breathing air. If you hold your breath, you collapse. Tobago expansion to tourism is a given, right? The cost-benefit analysis that we have done is to see what our Caribbean neighbors have done and to envy them for what they have done with that model.
Clarify, Prime Minister, where, because I believe it was during the time you were out of the country, I saw a post about your sandals team negotiating with some of the sandals personnel, where those talks are at, what time frame
that was
you
before
all
Minister Young can answer that. That happened before I went away.
It was a week before we left, and we met, the government's negotiating team met with Sandals executive, and actually last night they've provided a document to us, which we're now working to set out the timeline and the time frame for the project going forward and for negotiations. And on a preliminary stage, we hope to sign agreements, finalizing everything by September of this year. That's the current timeline, and we're working towards that right now and putting things in place.
Could you elaborate on the reasons the businesses did not seem interested in participating in the product?
There was only one well, I mentioned the government invited 3 of our major business houses. One up front said that they weren't interested. I couldn't answer so why. The other 2 said they would have been interested. And as of now, I should maintain that they are interested. But I did see some, let me put it this way. We in Trinidad and Tobago are not great pioneers in investing in our future, in our own future. The vast majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago who have resources, they have 1 foot in Trinidad and 1 foot outside. And if they have 2 feet in Trinidad, they have 1 eye outside. And I trust that answers your question. What we don't have here is a complete commitment to the future of Trinidad and Tobago, meaning that we will always be here. There are many people in this country, people of means, and it's not peculiar to us. I was reading about China on the way here from China and Chinese investment in America. And one of the conclusions that one of the university studies came to was that the vast majority of wealthy people in China put their children or their money in America in the hope that if things go bad, at least, that's why it's not peculiar to Trinidad and Tobago. We're just a very small country who would love to have all our investment dollars invested here amongst us, but that is not how it's going to be. And that is why the government has always had to lead as an investor. And if you look at our economy, this is the economy that we live on now, whether you like it or not. The quantum leaps that were made in this economy to give us the quality of life we have now were largely made by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. That has a knock-on because it created a society where more than everybody looked to the government for their sustenance or for their opportunity. That's a fact.
Prime Minister, You spoke about possibly speaking to the Chinese about tourism investments, including sandals. So were there other projects that you levied to them or suggested to them?
Not at this time. The project that we are focusing on now is a project that will put Tobago as a destination in the Caribbean package, and also add to a world business that we are not sufficiently participating in. There might be other projects. I mean, once Tobago becomes a destination of that nature, there are other possibilities for Tobago. I can tell you, it wouldn't just stop with one project. These things tend to accrete over time, because they're coming, if we get, as we expect to get the Sandals project going in Tobago, it will come like a tonic for the rest of tourism in Tobago, and other people who own good sites in Tobago and have friends who can invest in tourism. I am confident that that would be the catalyst for other investment in Tobago. And that's why we are investing in not a new airport. Because I saw on the news this morning, I saw on the news some confusion about we're going to build an airport in Tobago, a new airport in Tobago, and some people in Tobago were saying we're supposed to build a new airport because the one that is there now impacting on people's houses, we can't expand it and so on. There's no plan to build a new airport in Tobago. Tobago has an adequate airport, which is where the planes land. What we're going to build is a new terminal building, because the current terminal building is too small. Given the kind and size of aircraft that we are going to be expecting into Tobago and the numbers, the terminal building. So when you speak and when you write about this project at Crown Point, at A&R Robinson Airport, please talk about a new terminal building. That is all we're building there, and with a road to link it onto the Claude Noel Highway. This thing about building a new airport, because I've seen influential voices in Tobago reach the point of saying, let's build a new airport in Friendship. And we're not going to be detained by that, because there's some urgency in this matter. We are aiming to build a new terminal building. It's not the Taj Mahal, so it wouldn't damage all the buildings in Bon Accord. There might be a few houses or properties that might be impacted, and we are going to offer generous relocation to those persons. But the terminal building at the edge of the airport, because that's where terminal buildings are, we're going to build the terminal building at the airport. And because of the size of the building, the footprint might require one or two acquisitions, and that is what the acquisition law is about, because we understand that there are going to be times when public purpose infrastructure development would require that land that is in private hand now should fall to the state for a public purpose, and there's adequate and generous compensation available. So let us not detain ourselves with that. We're not building a new airport. We're building a new terminal building that can handle the traffic that we expect to come into the airport as we expand Trinidad and Tobago's tourism plant, as we diversify our economy. It's as simple as that. And all we are expected to do to get the benefit of that is to behave ourselves and not become negative pontificators on every God and everything the government says we're going to do.
All right, just a couple more questions.
Well, I have two questions. What the plan to sell asphalt from Lake Asphalt to Chinese company for their airport?
Let me tell you what the plan is. The plan is that we hardly have any asphalt to sell. Let me tell you what that means. Trinidad Lake Asphalt, TLA, we have a pitch lake. What is really going on at TLA, at Lake Asphalt, is Lake Asphalt is a post office for Petrotrin, where they literally just sell Petrotrin bitumen, rather than manufacture a product in any serious volume for export to the world. What we now know as Lake Asphalt is living off selling Petrotrin bitumen, which you get a docket, and you go to Petrotrin and you order your bitumen and Lake Asphalt signs, and you get the bitumen from Petrotrin. That is Lake Asphalt. What we are talking here about now is to have a production at Lake Asphalt of the raw material at Lake Asphalt, which is a product that ought to find its way into the world market. The very first thing we met when we landed in China was to be told that the Chinese are engaging now in building the largest airport. Now, that's a different thing. They're building the largest airport in the world. And our eyes lit up. And we said, well, could we consider supplying you the world-class product from Trinidad Lake Asphalt? But we had to keep within our jaws, within our cheeks, that we only producing 3,000 tons of that stuff. And therefore, whereas the potential to supply that high-quality, world-class product to the China has tens of airports. And you would have heard the Minister of Finance earlier on, the last budget, say that the government's intention was to divest some of Lake Asphalt's interests. The thinking behind that was, if we get an investor, possibly a Chinese investor, to partner with us, to produce from the lake, the market that we were looking at and still are looking at is the huge amount of airports in China where they can pay good money for our product. But as I speak to you now, Lake Asphalt is a post office for Petrotrin selling bitumen from Pointe-à-Pierre. But we could fix that, and we'll try to fix it.
That contract, we can't fulfill that as we...
Well, right now, our production is 3,000 tons per day. And I think that what we are told by the people, because the chairman of Lake Asphalt came with us on this trip, and now discussion, Lake Asphalt is in the process right now of ordering new equipment and aiming to develop the lake to be a producer from their own resources, to bring us to a point where we could actually benefit from meaningful diversification by selling Lake Asphalt product into, and it's a foreign exchange owner. So we are at that stage, you know, that's where the company is now. Getting new equipment, aiming to produce more, mechanizing the production, and putting proper arrangements in place so that we can produce a product which the world market can absorb and earn foreign exchange on a serious scale.
One, Ria, one.
Yeah, you said there are two. That was one. What's the other one?
Yeah, have you been invited to any Indian Arrival Day function? And what is your view?
I wasn't here. So I came in late last night. I went to bed at 1 o'clock. I got up at 3:30 this morning. So I have not been invited to nothing.
All right.
What is your view? This is part of the same question. What is your view?
Wait a minute. This press conference is about my trip to China.
Correct.
Okay, well, this...
No, you all. This is the last question. It's time to wrap up. The Prime Minister's had a grueling trip.
Since I wasn't here for 2 weeks, we'll have a few more questions. Because I see Taylor's trying to get me. We have got two questions. Right? Okay.
Any individual who claims to exercise mass control over votes. We've had Satyavraj say that he's freeing up, he's releasing the East Indian vote. And I want to find out from you what you think it means for our democracy as a country that in 2018 we can have someone say that with...
I don't know that I'm the person that you should direct that question to. I think you should ask the political leader of the UNC. As far as I am aware, we've been to the polls a number of times, and the people that we appeal to, the citizens of this country, they're free to vote. We're now discovering that some people's votes were mortgaged. So I, like you, I'm an observer.
Well, the opposition leader has responded in a very sort of mild way.
No, well, you see, the opposition leader has a number of positions. The last time she spoke, she would say, talk, Sat, talk. That's all I could say now. The last time Sat carried on with his racialness, she was the one as Prime Minister of this country who told him, talk, Sat, talk. No, that's Sat, talk. That's not for us. The PNM doesn't get involved in those people's business, you know. We get involved in the business of Trinidad and Tobago, right? That's where we are. And we have certain standards, win, lose, or draw. Mainly win. That's where we at. So when you're hearing now about freeing up people vote, we have always got the votes of the people of Trinidad and Tobago who gave it to us freely. and sometimes they withhold it freely. Because we are the PNM. Yes. Sorry, no, fairness, you had a question.
On behalf of my sport department, you're meeting with
On
Australia.
behalf of your what?
My sport department. You're meeting with Australia Cricket.
Oh, yes, yes, I forgot that. That was a very important meeting because we wanted to meet, I wanted to meet with Cricket Australia for the simple reason that I wanted to get a first-hand feel from them as to how they went about fixing their problem. And we did meet with Cricket Australia. We met with 2 of the senior executives, and they did give us good insights. And I could tell you, across Australia, there's a sadness about the demise of West Indies cricket. Every single person I spoke to, and there were many, man, woman, and child, speak about the great tragedy that is the loss of West Indies cricket. And they all spoke very fondly about the years of rivalry with West Indies cricket and the days when, you know, that was the pinnacle of cricket as a game. And that meeting, we had a very good meeting. But as you know, our future is tied up not so much with talking to Cricket Australia. That was good to get the experience and to solicit their support in whatever way they could talk to and about us. But the key to it is the ICC. They gave us an insight as to how they dealt with the ICC in bringing about the reorganization of their cricket. I'm a member of the cricket committee of CARICOM. Prime Minister Gonzalez is the chairman. We are trying to meet with the ICC for a sit-down for a conversation. In London, that was declined because of unavailability of certain people, but they indicated to us that an opportunity will arise in November, and we intend to avail ourselves of that opportunity. And as a member of that committee, I had valuable insights as to what went on in Australia, where Australia now has cricket run by Cricket Australia. As a matter of fact, one of the things I discovered is that the board, Cricket Australia, how people get there and how they function and who they represent. And it would make interesting conversation here in the West Indies as to how people get into that position in Australia and why Australia cricket is where it is and why ours is where it is.
Dr. Ali, it's been about, I think, 7 weeks or so since a report was requested into the situation at the Ministry of Sport, the situation involving Minister Darrell Smith, I think. About 7 weeks. Can you give us, have you made any considerations on that?
I was going through my emails this morning, and we had given the group an extension of 2 weeks. So I anticipate that after the holidays, I should receive that report. Yes.
The government sent a letter of congratulations to the new Prime Minister in Barbados. Did the government congratulate President Maduro on his re-election?
Well, Minister Imbert was in charge of the government for the last 2 weeks. I think you're putting that question to the wrong person. When the Prime Minister is acting, there are only a few things that he cannot do. And I think one of those is firing the Prime Minister, and he can't call the election. So I think you missed the opportunity to ask Minister Imbert that. I don't have an answer for that question. But if it hasn't been done, diplomatic niceties are always to be carried out.
There seems to have been quite a negative reaction in the hemisphere by the United States, by Canada, by Mexico, and by some others to the election in Venezuela.
Well, that sort of situation is not unusual, and there are certain peculiarities about the Venezuelan internal affairs which we will treat as such. There's a Lima group that has a position on it. We are not part of that group, but as Prime Minister, I've had a number of discussions with South American functionaries at different levels, and I had a long discussion with the Australian Prime Minister, because Australia is one of those countries that has the foreign minister of Australia and the prime minister of Australia. We had a long discussion on this matter. I would say that it was very fruitful discussion. And if I am to speak for the tenor around the table, is that there needs to be some significant dialogue to respond to the developments that are taking place around us. Trinidad and Tobago stands by its position of non-intervention and non-interference. But having said that, we are acknowledging that there are difficulties in Venezuela, but there are a variety of recommendations coming from many different quarters, and it is for us to find some common ground somewhere along the way.
Just going back to the Lake Asphalt issue that Ria brought up, were there
Which
other
one?
discussions?
Which one? We brought up a lot of issues.
No,
Lake Asphalt.
with reference to other projects that the Chinese may have had some
That
investment.
what?
In reference to other projects that the Chinese may have had some investment with previously, like say the smelter plant, were there discussions with regards to those things as well?
The Chinese are notorious for being polite. And while we discussed that matter here in Trinidad, and we had come to no agreement, and it is still a vexed matter, and we still have liabilities, I can tell you, in typical Chinese style, in China, not one person raised that matter. It does not mean that the matter doesn't exist. Okay? Thank you very much, and thank you very much for welcoming me back to the country in the way I left it, and hopefully better.